Hello, everybody. This is James Cool. I'm the producing artistic director at Tipping Point, and today, our continuing dialogue with artists about the art that they do outside of theater and creativity, we have our first team. This is the first interview that I've done with two people at the same time. I myself come from an artistic partnership where both Hallie and I are in theater, and we have Brian and Stephanie Ogden, who are both very much in the world of theater. Stephanie is a stage manager and a director, specifically with Tipping Point. Steph, you started stage managing with us for the touring production of Every Brilliant Thing. And since then, you have stage managed the 39 Steps. Mm-hmm. And then sadly, the Baxter Sisters started. You were stage managing that one as well. And sadly, that one got halted in the process. But you've also directed in other places, right?
Yes,
Where?
The Redwood Curtain at Purple Rose.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And I directed Richard III for Royal Oak Shakespeare.
Wonderful. And Brian and I actually went to grad school together at the Hillberry. And since then, Brian has been an actor at the Purple Rose Waterworks, I think. And at Tipping Point. In fact, you were in the first production of Every Christmas Story Ever Told, and then some when we did it here about 10 years ago. And then most recently, I think, was Young Americans. Is that correct?
Right. That is correct, at least to the best of my recollection.
And then you've also been you're a trained fight choreographer, and you've done some fight stuff for us as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Playwright. Oh, and the playwright. Yeah, you've had a couple of plays produced, like jack of all trades there. But I'm not really here to talk about any of those things. That's just sort of the introduction of it. What I'm really interested in is the art form that you guys do outside of theater, and it is I want to say it is definitely different. Not different like, boy, you guys are different, but the skills are compatible, but it's not exactly it. So, well, I guess you describe it about, because you've created a podcast based around a role-playing game. I'm familiar with like the rules of Dungeons and Dragons, and I think that's probably the most accessible, but I know that there are other systems out there that involve dices and things like that. So why don't you talk about what it is that you're doing with what is the podcast and why you started doing it?
Yeah, for sure. So what we started doing is called an actual play podcast, which there are many of them out there that are very well and religiously followed by the people that are into them. Although I confess myself, I'm not a big, ironically enough, podcast person. So the only ones that I've listened to, I started to for the purposes of research, right? Mm-hmm. To like try and put it together. But anyway, an actual play podcast is essentially you're recording a session of a bunch of people playing a role-playing game of their choice, right? And usually it's Dungeons and Dragons, but not always. The game that we play is called Blades in the Dark, which I want to say was invented in 2016 and won some kind of big RPG award when it came out. And so since then, like, I don't think anything is ever going to have the brand recognition of Dungeons and Dragons, but
right, yeah, that seems to be the model. Just for clarification, the RPG does stand for role-playing game, correct?
For sure.
Okay. And in the format of a role-playing game, there tends to be one person who has created the story or is the guide, and then there are individuals who play the game in a sort of mesh of improving as well as like a choose your own adventure type of a thing? Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah. So there's one person who in Dungeons and Dragons is called the Dungeon Master, and just about every other game they call him the Game Master, them the Game Master, and that person in our podcast, that is me, and that person is kind of basically responsible for controlling uh, controlling the world with which the characters will interact, right? And the rest of the players make up usually a single character that they navigate through that world. And it's kind of, different games have different rules and philosophies. The way that we hope to play is where it's like, you know, near 90% improv and 10% or less of actually rolling the dice, but every once in a while, typically when conflict arises, sometimes the story can dictate how it resolves, but sometimes you kind of need a system to do that. So that's usually where the dice come into play.
Okay, so Steph, so Brian, you're the I want to say the creator of the world, or is it a collaboration between the two of you for the creation of the world, or is that like that's Brian and then Steph, do you have control over creation of your character or the person that you are playing within the world, or is that sort of like fed a little bit like, oh, we need amphibian woman. So therefore, you have to create it within this limitation. So Steph, how does that work?
We definitely conversed among the group of us that were going to be playing together about what type of characters we wanted to play. In Blades in the Dark, there's a pretty structured idea of like what type of character, the class, is that what that's called, the class of the character?
Yeah.
So like my character that I picked is called a slide, and so I had complete control over creating my character, but I definitely picked that based on what did our group need in order to have sort of like a balanced party of adventurers.
Right, yeah,
And
because
then
I was going to say, when you think about like the group of people, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of balanced groups that have been that class that are actually based off the archetypes of the Golden Girls.
yeah.
Obviously, yes, that's totally true. That's totally
I think that there's actually a story out there that actually does kind of lay that out there. But it's the idea of having an ensemble or a group of people that have very specific identities that help to balance things out.
Well, I think that's probably like at the heart of any ensemble storytelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is at the heart of, I think, all role-playing games that are worth playing anyway, is like, that's kind of how I try to explain it to people who've never done it before, is like, basically you're getting together to tell a story together, right? And some of us have I don't know, our influence is maybe a bit further reaching, but even in the case of like in the way that we play, as often as possible, I'm not always great about this, like as the characters enter a location that they've never been to before,
Yeah.
I will go ahead.
He'll say something about it, but then he'll ask us like, okay, what does this place look like, or what's a interesting story about this location? And so it gives us an opportunity to add some color and some shading where either the game's mechanics or the situation that he's created for us already has the outlines.
Is there a particular moment, Steph, that sort of that the group well, I guess I should back up here. It isn't just you and Brian. There are other individuals within the group. How many other individuals are there?
Currently 3.
So it's a total of four in the group and Brian.
Uh-huh.
And actually, one of the individuals oh, actually, no, we do. We know two other actors in the group. Joey Estava. Help me. Joey
Gertz.
Estava Gersi, thank you very much. Who was in Doll's House Part 2, and Michael Lopatrone, who was most recently seen in Anatomy of a Hug here at Tipping Point. And so I guess then this would be the next question. How did these worlds converge that you got this group of people to do this adventure with you?
Oh man, that's funny. That's a long story because you and Biff have been friends forever.
Mm-hmm. The fifth member or fourth member, right, is my best friend from like sixth grade, and who we started playing the games together, and so he's sort of the odd man out. The rest of us are from the acting community. Go ahead.
Well, we met Joey first at the Rose when she was an apprentice, but then randomly bumped into her. I did in Detroit at Pony Ride when I was working for Detroit Public Theater, and she was working for another arts group. And so we got back in touch then. Then Low Patron, I guess it was really Beauty Queen at Detroit Public Theater where we really like our friendship sort of flourished out of just like casual acquaintance. Yeah.
But it was, in terms of like for the podcast, I had been listening to some, and as an actor, right? Like where this stuff starts to cross in, speaking only for myself, is my great frustration. I've played a lot of these games with a lot of different groups, and some have been just like epically enjoyable, right?
Yeah.
Have been so disappointing. And invariably the disappointment comes from people who are like either obsessed with rolling the dice and having high stats and like winning all the time as much as they can, and or people who kind of always want to make it funny, goofy, which I have an appreciation for, and I like it, but where the want for silliness sort of like undercuts the stakes of the story, I don't find that enjoyable. So all that to say that what I was hoping to do when I was like, oh, I want to do a podcast, because I really wanted to get players together. It was more important to me that people had a sense of how to build a story, what was dramatically engaging than if they had ever played the game before, right? And I felt like people, hopefully the people that I think are the most interesting actors anyway, they usually understand that their character doesn't always win. And sometimes the character has to lose, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that is, in terms of this activity, I think that is the thing that it's most difficult to put a price on, because it's like, it opens up all the doors for you in terms of the stories that you can tell.
Yeah. What's the most enjoyable part of it for both of you, considering that you have different roles in it?
I'm talking too much.
Well, I would say that it's exactly that, though, for me, is the making something with Brian, because our history is rooted in collaborating on artwork together. And so it's really nice to be doing that again, especially because since having our kid, we haven't had very much of that time where we've both been able to be in the same room doing stuff. So it's really nice because, I'll be editing a chunk and I'll be like, oh, listen to this. This sounds really good, the way I put this together. And he'll be drawing, and I think for me, that's definitely been the fact that it's been so accessible to do it in isolation with him.
So that brings up two new art forms that we haven't talked about yet that are definitely connected into this. And one of that is the editing process of it, because you so Steph, walk me through the process of what ends up happening then with the podcast, of how do you get from like, around the table to the final product?
So far, it takes us several sessions of like getting together and hey, how you doing, and catching ups, and then actually playing and then saying our goodbyes. It takes several of those for like one episode.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, I'm realizing that we're only using about 20% of what we record in our episodes, because there's also a lot of discussion sometimes that will go on and on about philosophy of a rule or something,
Right.
and
Right.
where that's interesting to a possible gamer, I've tried to keep that, but for a lot of that can be like just minutes of us looking up a rule. Nobody wants to listen to that. So I'm trying to go through and take out the sort of redundancies and the talking around things so that the listener will get really the story will shine more, what they're listening to, as opposed to.
And is it all audio, or is it now is it also Zoom? So it's basically like this, where we record a group Zoom meeting, and then you go back and use film editing software to splice it together.
Yeah, I'm using Audacity because we're really,
Oh yeah.
it's a podcast, it's just the audio. So I'm very new to it, but I'm trying to dig in and, teach ourselves as much as we can. We've had a couple of bumpy spots where we like lost a session, or like we realize, oh, you can't save it with that file format, it just ruins it, So all of those little hiccups, we kind of full steam ahead rushed into getting it going, because we're sitting around really needing it. And I know for me, like, part of what's hard being at home all the time is that I'm used to going out and like sharing my ideas with other artists and having that like that bouncing back and forth and that brainstorming, that just like living in that sort of like in process mode. And that's been gone. So at least with this, I can like shoot other people in the group a little chunk to listen to. Or like we've made a couple of little videos that are sort of like highlighting some of the fun stuff, and that's really fun because then I get to share that with people, and it's like, okay, there are still people out there to like witness each other.
Yeah, to be connected. And yeah, you're absolutely right. I want to connect over now to Brian, and how I know that you're also a very talented artist, like a drawer. That doesn't sound nearly as.
That's what it is. That's what I am.
A drawer.
You're a drawer.
And so, but a lot of the drawings that I've seen you do are in this fantasy world of things. So what's the chicken and the egg situation here? Does it are the drawings based from what's being developed by your group, or do they come from your imagination and then get put into the world?
Yes is the answer to that. I mean, like anything, it depends. I think we may have started or are trying to start a protocol or a policy, I guess, of releasing in the lead up to dropping an episode, not just a piece of artwork plugging it, but specifically a piece of artwork that is a scene taken from the episode that we're about to drop, right? So in those cases, the art is very much coming from what happened around the table.
Like I've tasked Brian with being like, I want this shot for this episode, and I want this shot for that episode.
Yeah. And that's been a ton of fun, because like I'm a pretty literal thinker and frequently a linear thinker, and Steph is not always. So her ideas are usually a lot better than mine, when it comes down to it. So that's advantageous for sure. And then some of the stuff is like, like I know that something is going to appear, and I'd like to have a sense of it, or I just think it would look pretty cool, or maybe I think that this is an element that's going to be important at some point, but I don't actually really know what it looks like yet. And I think sort of on the paper very frequently. I caught myself the other day, and this was the first time that I was somehow in my entire life, not the first time that I was doing it, but the first time that I had become aware of it, where I was drawing an orc on in the picture, and I was literally like like as I was drawing it, and I realized, oh my God, I as stupid as it sounds, I literally get into the character that I am drawing, like to an extent that I find personally annoying. Like until like something that's like, God, just let me finish this thing so I can say anything other than. Did you see that picture of Matt Gwynn's dwarf bard?
No, I haven't. If you have it, I'd love to see it. So just for clarity, Matt Gwynn is another actor, most predominantly at the Purple Rose. But the two of you did a Jeff Daniels show together. The meaning of almost everything. Is that I?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But you and Matt go way back as well, like because he was in Bleeding Red. Is that right?
He was in Bleeding Red and Growing Pretty. He was an apprentice with Steph at the time.
Okay, so that's the relationship that goes way back. But now, actually, I should get to talk to him about the art of making beer because he's a very talented. I should. Okay. Okay.
Obvious.
The dwarf.
So whatever, I was doing a thing and I called him and I was like, hey, you've got characters, give me one of your whatevers. And he was like, yeah. And he described me this dwarven bard who had like this very heavy metal-ish background and sent me like paragraphs of description. I was like, this is great, I'm gonna draw this character. And I did, and I loved it. But for 2 hours, all I was able to say under my breath was, oh yeah, brother.
Until you're like, I hate myself.
Yes. It's like, why did I do this?
Well, actually, this brings me to a very important, because I actually have a Brian Ogden original that I wanted to share here. Let me see if I can get this so that people can see it there. And so this right here was a similar situation to what it is that you are describing, because for my 40th birthday, one of the things that I'm like, you want to know what I'd love to do? I just love to fight orcs. I just wish I could fight orcs, because this idea, that fantasy world, like I love the Lord of the Rings, or even go into different direction and take it into to Star Wars. But all, that sort of fantastical realm that is, I love dragons. I think that if I ever were to get a tattoo, it probably would be, somehow a dragon related. Like that sort of mythology is something that, that we all allow ourselves to go to. And so I mentioned that to a friend, and they approached you and asked you to draw that. So yeah. I'm very thankful to have a Brian Ogden original.
It was my pleasure. And in good conscience, I have to give props to Brent Meskey, who is the other person on the podcast that I referenced earlier, my friend from middle school, who did all the coloring on that, because I don't do color. I'm not good at it, but he does. And he did.
So let's share. Let's share where people can go in order to experience your podcast. How do we get a hold of that?
The Harvestman is on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts. It's on a lot of different platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to harvestmanpodcast.com to our website directly. And that's also where you'll be able to see more artwork.
It's true. This would also be a great time to say, because we just launched, who knows when this will go out, but we just launched May 1st. So we have 8 weeks to get onto iTunes new and noteworthy list, which is basically like extra free publicity for new podcasts. But in order to do that, you need to be you need subscribers and you need reviews specifically on iTunes. So anybody can listen to us in, wherever you find your podcasts, but it would be extra helpful, anyone with an iTunes account, if you do listen to it and you do enjoy it, by all means, please leave us a review and subscribe. You can even subscribe and then never listen to it. So
we don't mind.
That's fine. It won't hurt us.
And so to get the name of the podcast is The Harvestman?
Correct.
Great. So we'll make sure to put that link when we do get this out there. We'll put that we'll attach that in some way so that people can go directly to it. It has been wonderful talking to the two of you. There are like 15 different directions that we can continue to geek out on, as Dungeons and Dragons was definitely a part of my high school years, and I do still have a complete set of 3rd edition. I have the 3rd edition set.
Almost the best edition. Almost.
Yeah. That's when it really took off. But it's, it really is a wonderfully imaginative art form and fun game to play. So thank you very much.
No. Thank you. And I'm going to have you as a guest on the podcast at one point. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but if you...
I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in. I totally... I would love to. I would absolutely love to. And now that I know how to operate Zoom,
right?
I'm there. I am totally there.
Cool. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank you very much, Steph. I appreciate it. Your dog Falcor is wonderful, as is your daughter Lily, who I spoke to as well in our children's series. Thank you very much for continuing to be creative artists here in Michigan.
Thank you.
See you soon.
We'll see you soon. All right.
Be safe.
Same to you. Bye.
Bye.
The following is a trailer for the Harvestman podcast that features content that may not be suitable for all ages. Viewer discretion is advised.
Who needs like a refresher?
Michael, raise his hand.
That will start a 4-section clock called Footsteps on the Stairs. Filling 1 segment.
It's a great game for people with anxiety disorders, isn't it?
Right.
Harvestman?
It's just a garden variety failure.
Oh. It's gonna be that kind of party, guys. Buckle up.
What's the devil's bargain? Boop.
Taking a thrust from me, buddy.
652.
Hey, look at you.
The sun's up. I rolled a 6.
You guys, I have such a gaming erection. I love starting my day with you guys.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
Huh? Shut up.
Visit harvestmanpodcast.com.
The Harvestman is an Ambling Nymph production.